Greetings everyone, welcome back to another episode of Lavader dunking on random things and people. Today we have someone who I have been meaning to properly address for quite some time now, and that person is Balkan Odyssey. He's a Marxist-Leninist Youtuber, and he is a Bosnian, just like me, and currently lives in Germany, and well, here am I, also making a video from my apartment in Germany. Yeah, we're not beating the stereotypes, are we? To be frank, I have always kept my eye on Balkan Odyssey, in fact even before I even started making videos on this channel. In fact, here is some fun trivia for you. Balkan Odyssey was originally an inspiration for me, as I based my early trash editing style on his. So Odyssey, if you are watching this, thanks for igniting the flame of autism within me. There is one video from him that really caught my eye, and that is this one. Everything you know about history is probably wrong. And, well, it is sort of what you would expect from a Marxist-Leninist. You will see what I mean in just a second. Now this video is 30 minutes long, and since I do not want this video to be more than an hour long, I will focus on the, in my opinion, most important points in the video. There is a moment when he randomly starts talking about capitalism, so I will just leave that part out. So let's not waste any more time and see what Odyssey has to say on why everything we know about history is probably wrong.
So, let us begin with a critique of a popular approach towards explaining historical events. The one that you may hear in your college or university classrooms, or perhaps from your favorite history YouTuber. Namely, there seems to be a favored tendency of presenting historical events through personal narratives of highly influential and great historical figures, and unique individuals, as the main protagonists of these events, also known as the great man theory. The decisive historical role is attributed to the personality and natural attributes of the given historical figures, their greatness or malice, their personal plans and ambitions, leadership abilities, superior intellect, or divine inspiration. Despite being extremely intuitive and helpful for visualizing complex historical events, this approach ends up creating shallow caricatures of entire movements and social dynamics, personifying them into one single individual, which is nothing short of tragic for the pursuit of any meaningful historical analysis.
I am gonna use this point to basically lay the foundations of what I am about to argue in the later parts of the video. You can already see what Odyssey is working towards, and that is the critique of the great man theory, which basically argues that history is shaped by these few exceptional individuals and that we should only look towards them and their actions. Now, I myself have some issues with the great man theory as well, because it overlooks the complex interplay of social, economic, political, and cultural factors that shape historical events. But there is a good reason why the great man theory exists in the first place. The obvious problem with the great man theory is that it makes history a little too simple. In the end, there are so many important details to be understood in order to get the whole picture. But the impact these single individuals have had cannot be understated. Because right now, tell me with a straight face that Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who had an entire era of history named after, did not have a big impact on the European continent. Obviously, Napoleon did not work alone. No ruler can govern all by himself, but if it wasn't for Napoleon spearheading this vision in the first place, then it would have never come to fruition. If he never decided to move against the Directory and make himself consul, the Napoleonic era as we know it may have never happened. The best example of this would probably be the first example Odyssey discusses.
Now, here's a few examples of what I mean by that. Firstly, the history of World War II is often retold as a consequence of the individual psychopathy and dark genius of Adolf Hitler, and a few others like him. His personal grand master plan to conquer the world because of his personal obsessions and phobias that he used to enchant the masses under his iron fist. Take one of Jordan Peterson's lessons as an example.
One of the things about Hitler was that he was very disgust sensitive, and a lot of his hatred for non-Aryans. So imagine inside the Aryan box it was all uniform, outside it was all parasites and predators. Hitler bathed 4 times a day. And he was also an admirer of willpower, so he could stand like this for 8 hours in the back of a car. And the thing about conscientious people is they're very willpower oriented. He cleaned up all the factories. Like he went in there and fumigated them. It was part of the law. And he went on a public health campaign to get rid of tuberculosis, and he got rid of the bugs in the factories as well. And he used Zyklon B. That's an insecticide, and that's the gas that he used in the gas chambers eventually.
Just a quick question. Have any of you perhaps watched or heard one of Hitler's speeches, even the ones floating around that have an AI automatically translating them into English? Even when you know what Hitler's saying is false, and you are conscious about it, you still can't help but feel a bit enchanted by the way he speaks, and how you can't help but keep listening. The thing about Hitler was that he was a naturally born and great orator, and that is exactly how he managed to rise to such prominence in the first place. Hitler wasn't just leader of the Nazi Party, he was the Nazi Party, the literal face of it. All eyes were on him during the Weimar years. When the people voted for the Nazis, do you think they cared who Goebbels was, Himmler, Bormann, or any other Nazi crony? Hell, they probably did not even care that much about the policies of the Nazis. They voted specifically for Hitler and not the general Nazi apparatus. In fact, one of the Nazis' election posters echoed specifically that sentiment. This one. There is no Nazi Party symbolism, there is no other person, it's just Hitler. The message is clear. You only need Hitler, no one else. Historian Ian Kershaw, who wrote one of the most well-known contemporary biographies of Adolf Hitler, would state, quote, "Is it likely, we might ask, that a terroristic police state such as that which developed under Himmler and the SS would have been erected without Hitler as head of government? Would Germany, under a different leader, even an authoritarian one, have been engaged by the end of the 1930s in general European war? And would, under a different head of state, discrimination against Jews have culminated in out-and-out genocide? The answer to each of these questions would surely be no, or, at the very least, highly unlikely. Whatever the external circumstances and impersonal determinants, Hitler was not interchangeable. The establishment of the Führer cult was decisive for the development of the Nazi movement. Without it, as 1924 had shown, it would have been torn apart by factionalism. With it, the still precarious unity could be preserved by calling on loyalty to Hitler as a prime duty. Among the party leadership, feelings had to be subordinate to the overriding need for unity. The Führer cult was accepted because it offered all parties the only remedy to this. Personal loyalty to Hitler, whether genuine or forced, was the price of unity. In some cases, Nazi leaders were wholly convinced of Hitler's greatness and mission. In others, their own ambitions could only be upheld by lip service to the supreme leader. Now, obviously, Hitler did not lead the party all by himself, and we should still examine the impacts of people like Goebbels, Himmler, and Göring, since they were also key elements within Nazi Germany. But still, one cannot understate the impact the Führer, the central figure of the Nazi Party, had on its rise and grip on power. Do you think the Nazis would have achieved the same level of success or even gained power if it was led by any other guy? Probably not. This is the thing I am talking about. These individuals, these figures obviously cannot rule alone, and they employ their own cronies who have some degree of autonomy, as I mentioned figures like Goebbels and Himmler. But still, people like Hitler are the figures these movements revolve around. They are the face of it, the top of the hierarchy. When they fall, the entire system may as well perhaps come crashing down with it. To say that single individuals do not have that much of an impact is an extremely flawed premise. We need to acknowledge that certain individuals do have a significant impact on historical events. The challenge lies in balancing the recognition of individual agency with an understanding of broader contextual factors.
Even though you may not see anything wrong in these examples, I assure you that, as soon as you're acquainted with the proper alternative, the defects in this approach will become more than apparent. Namely, in all four of these examples, we bear witness to a one-dimensional caricature, an idealistic oversimplification of, in actuality, extremely complex and multifaceted chains of events that would require hundreds of pages of proper analysis to even scratch their surface. What we often ingest in this form is the fast food of social sciences, the indolent and low-effort version of historical narratives that perfectly accommodates our embarrassingly bad attention spans and goldfish memory, while presenting itself as historical science of some sort. It's nothing but an insult to your intellect. The great man theory is a pure manifestation of the cult of the genius, of the hyper-individualist insistence that individual people are the sole sources of human ingenuity due to their inherent genetical and intellectual superiority, or, as it is often told, as a result of their tireless grind and hustle. This declaration presumes that all human beings are fully independent agents that interact with their environment through their free will, that live in a vacuum and are in no way conditioned by environmental factors that may be out of their control. They apparently possess full agency over their own traits, thoughts, and actions, and their genius is therefore worshipped as an admirable display of conscious individual brilliance.
Now, here is the funny part about everything Odyssey has been saying for these past few minutes. He has done a major strawman here. This wouldn't be an issue if he was just criticizing the great man theory, but rather he is criticizing and attacking the status quo of the academic field of history as a whole, because it apparently still practices the theory. As he said in the beginning,
but because the way we learn history in educational and academic environments, but also in the context of hobbies and entertainment, is inherently flawed. The way we approach the investigation of historical figures and events is, to put it mildly, embarrassingly shallow and superficial. So much so that many who get to call themselves historians and academics end up making a mockery out of the entire field. Therefore, in the following minutes, I will elaborate on why this is most definitely the case, by pointing out the shortcomings and inadequacies of the default philosophy that dominates academic discourse in the 21st century.
Now, I don't know what kind of historians and academics you have met, Odyssey, but if you approached any modern historian with the great man theory, they will give you a lecture on how flawed it is. Maybe it is still prevalent in schools because, sometimes you need to simplify history for students in order for them to swallow it. But on an upper-end academic level, no one adheres to it. Modern historians often use interdisciplinary methods incorporating insights from sociology, political science, economics, and so on to provide a more nuanced understanding of historical events. If historians still adhere to the great man theory, we would only be getting information from these primary great individuals. But there are many historians who explore lesser known individuals and their impact, and explore many subjects with a lot of nuance. Actually, plenty of historians have emphasized the need to be more nuanced when dealing with historical topics. British historian Eric Hobsbawm wrote an entire book on the field of history, and in the introduction he emphasized, quote, "Historians who still adhere to the traditional methods and approaches of their discipline are increasingly likely to be seen as missing the broader perspectives provided by sociology, anthropology, political science, and economics. An interdisciplinary approach offers a more comprehensive and nuanced understanding of historical phenomena." French historian Fernand Braudel would also write something similar in another book, quote, "History cannot be content to see events as a mere succession of surface phenomena. It must also analyze and interpret the underlying structures that shape those events. To achieve this, historians must draw on the methods and findings of sociology, geography, economics, and other disciplines." I can go on, but you get the point. The academic field of history today observes topics from a more nuanced perspective, and while it acknowledges the feats and importances of single individuals, they aren't the only thing they focus on when examining these eras. Odyssey, on the other hand, says that the field still completely adheres to the great man theory without offering any shred of evidence to support his claim, but rather just gives 4 examples of how history was taught to him in school, and I know that because we both grew up under the same education system. So this entire first premise is just a giant blatant strawman. If he was just attacking the great man theory, then that would be fine, but the problematic part is when he claims that the academic field of history still sticks to it. Funnily enough, if he was just focusing on the theory, I would actually be agreeing with him here in the first half of the video. The great man theory has issues which I have emphasized in the beginning, and as Odyssey says, it is very simplistic and ignores a lot of nuance and complexities. But now, watch what he says next.
A quick repudiation of this entire worldview doesn't require much. All that needs to be said is that it wasn't the pharaohs that built the pyramids, it wasn't Caesar who built the Colosseum, nor was it the emperors that built the Great Wall of China. It was workers, people like you and me who collectively toiled away for millions upon millions of hours, carrying billions of tons of building materials over their own backs to build these impressive landmarks. It wasn't the genius wizardry of any of these cults of personality that managed these impressive feats of construction. It was the collective effort of millions of minds and bodies accumulating and coordinating their abilities and knowledge throughout the millennia, learning and correcting each other perpetually and interdependently. It was not the individual heroes and geniuses, but the general intellect of the human race as a whole that discovered electricity and penicillin, that built skyscrapers, dams and bridges, or that indulged in self-destructive annihilation through great wars and conquests. These individual people who we praise and put on pedestals for their achievements are not to be discredited, but rather viewed in the larger context of the general intellect, as mere fruits of the gigantic tree of human knowledge, as the personifications and embodiments of centuries of collectively accumulated knowledge and abilities that clicked in a certain way inside of the mind of that individual, that connected the dots and articulated ideas in a useful way. And this applies to all scientists, authors, engineers, designers, philosophers, etc.
Oh boy, what started as a few stumbles has now become a complete freefall. Let's set the record straight. The idea of a general intellect or collective consciousness simply does not exist. This concept, often romanticized by populists like Odyssey, suggests that masses of people can spontaneously organize and drive change. However, this notion is misleading and unrealistic. The reality is that without leadership and direction, the masses are incapable of cohesive action. To give an example, think of a battle scenario. Would 100 men, led by a strategic genius, be more effective, or 1,000 men with no leader, each acting independently? The answer is clear. Leadership and organization are crucial for any collective action to succeed. This principle is not new. It was extensively discussed by German sociologist Robert Michels, who delved into the dynamics of organizational behavior and leadership. Quote, "The most striking proof of the organic weakness of the mass is furnished by the way in which, when deprived of the leaders in time of action, they abandon the field of battle in disordered flight. They seem to have no power of instinctive reorganization, and are useless until new captains arise, capable of replacing those that have been lost." When it comes to things like warfare, it is the way in which people are directed that matters the most. When you have two generals, each with a certain number of soldiers, in the end, the general that manages to trick, outmaneuver, and best the other general with tactics and strategy will be the one to win. Because if you just have a giant horde running around without leadership, they can all be picked off one by one. And this can also be applied to literally everything else. Let's go back to the pyramids. Yes, it is true that the workers built the pyramids. And now, answer me this. What is the purpose of the pyramids? They are tombs. Yes. Tombs for whom exactly? Yup, the pharaohs. The pyramids were built under the order of the pharaohs. Yes, the workers still built it, but without the order of the pharaohs, the pyramids would have never been built. Humans are not a hive mind. Workers will not just wake up one day and decide to build the Great Wall of China and know exactly what they need to do. You need a team of engineers to plan the whole build and then tell the workers how they are gonna build it. Workers and engineers do not work collectively. The engineers are the ones who draw plans on a blueprint on how a building should be constructed, and then instruct the workers to build it this way. This means you have a class of people that rules and a class of people that is ruled over. To build something, to best an enemy in battle, all of those things require organization, and in every form of organization, you will have that distinction between the people who order and those who are ordered around, because hierarchy is natural. Collective consciousness does not exist because humans aren't a hive mind. Not everyone is gonna get the same idea, not everyone is gonna know how to do something, and not everyone is in the position to lead. I actually have a whole video discussing this topic in more detail, on why populism is largely an illusion that will never come true, so I would highly recommend you to check it out. Even Vladimir Lenin, the man who Odyssey idolizes, realized this, which is why he developed the concept of vanguard party rule, which emphasizes that the revolution needs a leadership that will guide the working class through the revolutionary process and towards the establishment of the socialist state. You can't expect revolution to come by just giving every factory worker a gun and telling him to go be a revolutionary. Quote, "One of the biggest and most dangerous mistakes made by communists is the idea that a revolution can be made by revolutionaries alone. On the contrary, to be successful, all serious revolutionary work requires that the idea that revolutionaries are capable of playing the part only of the vanguard of the truly virile and advanced class must be understood and translated into action. A party is the vanguard of a class, and its duty is to lead the masses and not merely to reflect the average political level of the masses." So even Lenin disagrees with Odyssey on this matter. He made it clear that in order for a revolution to succeed, there needs to be a small, disciplined group of committed revolutionaries that will guide the quote-unquote plebeians to victory. And this is exactly why these people at the top get all this credit. In a battle, it will be the general strategies and plans that will determine the outcome of the battle. When a building is being built, it comes down to the engineers and architects' careful planning that will make sure that the building will not collapse. And when things go wrong, it is they who are blamed, not the workers or soldiers who just followed orders. And that is exactly the point. They just follow orders. And even if they are important in actually fighting the battle or building a building, in the end, it is the strategies of those at the top that will make or break it.
So why is it then that we tend to fetishize this cult of the genius, the great men and heroes, so piously? Why is it that we ignore the contributions and efforts of the general intellect, of the millions of workers and peasants, or forgotten and discarded thinkers and scientists of the Third World, whose efforts and achievements have been stolen and appropriated, but without whom none of this would be possible? Why are we stuck in this rigid dogma of hyper-individualism?
That's the thing, they aren't forgotten and discarded. If they truly were, we would have no records of them or their contributions. The information is out there, you just have to search for it. And not to mention, this is why we have things like Memorial Day, Tombs of the Unknown Soldier and so forth, whose purpose is honoring the little man and all the normal soldiers who died. And all their names are displayed on their graves, on monuments, and in the National Archives. Because here's the thing, you literally cannot honor all 34 million Soviet soldiers who served in World War II one by one individually. I mean, you could, but you would sooner drop dead than finish the whole thing. And look, even if we completely disregard what I have said about the general intellect, there are still two big problems with viewing history from this populist lens. The first is the issue of sources. Most historical records focus on the lives and actions of the ruling and dominant groups. Even the records that mention ordinary people were created by the dominant classes or their associates, usually for administrative reasons. There are more records about these groups when they were resisting or rebelling against authorities. As one essay about this view of history, where I did not manage to find info about the author, makes it clear, Quote, "Before the late 18th century in Europe, access to such sources is restricted. For other parts of the world, particularly the third world countries, the availability of such records is even more difficult. Moreover, as most of these records were created by and for the members of the dominant groups, they suffer from hyperbole, neglect, and misrepresentation. For example, the police records revealing the subversive activities among the masses are often exaggerated. Similarly, they completely ignored those areas in the life of people which were not in administrative interest. The problem is compounded because the masses have generally not left much records of their own. Popular culture is generally preserved through the oral medium and not through written medium. The oral tradition, as Hobsbawm remarks, is a remarkably slippery medium for preserving facts. The point is that memory is not so much a recording as a selective mechanism, and the selection is, within limits, constantly changing. The paucity of written sources left by the ordinary people is a great hindrance in writing about their feelings and ideas. And then there is the issue of, how do you exactly define the people or the general intellect? Even when you claim to write about the people, the term can be used in different and conflicting ways. A notable example is the book People's History and Socialist Theory, where the people are defined just by their exploitation and not belonging to some universal collective. This issue is made worse by excluding certain groups from the category of people and considering some groups more people than others. According to one author, the people could be the proletariat, while according to another, they are the peasantry. Johann Herder, a German Romantic scholar, did not include urban masses in the category of people. For him and his followers, the real people were peasants who lived close to nature and were innocent. Or, if you want a more socialist example, socialist Edward Thompson in his book Making of the English Working Class completely excludes working class Tories from the people, just because of the fact that they were politically conservative. When you say the people or the collective, then that means literally everyone. Otherwise, you can basically kick people out of that label just because they don't fit your own little definition. Either there is a distinction, in that case it can be twisted according to any person, or there isn't, and that means there are no labels like bourgeois or proletariat.
But thankfully there is an alternative to this apathy, one that breathes fresh air into the discourse about history, and by extension, about prospects for our future. This alternative offers us a historical model that is dynamic, modular, and constantly evolving, whose unceasing development is perceived in all of its complexity pertaining interconnectedness, interdependence, and causality. The philosophy that gives us the ability of such advanced analysis is namely dialectical materialism, whose core mechanisms I will try to explain in a couple of sentences, but which nonetheless deserves a much more nuanced conversation. I've already talked about the basics of dialectical and historical materialism in my video Are You Afraid of Communism? And there are many other amazing videos by, for example, the Marxist Project, that delve much deeper into this huge subject. If you in any way feel confused or intimidated by the concept, don't worry. It does take some time to digest, so take your time and be patient. Nonetheless, in short, this method entices us to view social relations, material phenomena, and, by extension, the entire universe as a series of contradictions. The resolvement of these contradictions through a dialectical synthesis of new phenomena results in qualitative and quantitative changes that are the driving force of historical progress. The application of the dialectical method onto history, the topic of this very video, is also known as historical materialism, according to which human history is a series of societal, economic, and political contradictions and clashes, whose ultimate expression comes in the form of class struggle between the possessing and laboring classes. Through this lens, it becomes apparent that the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles, and not random events and petty elitist politics that are out of our control. Nonetheless, in complete contrast to the lethargy of liberal idealism, With this method of investigation, we treat phenomena, events, and social forces as something fluid, shape-shifting, and ever-evolving, resistant to enclosure and to rigid definitions inside the vacuum of the idealist mind. We thus derive historical definitions from material and social phenomena, instead of forcing bluntly predefined concepts onto the ever-changing material world. Instead of defining capitalism or communism with 5 clean bullet points and seeking the manifestation of this predefined concept in the material world, we observe the material conditions and processes that surround us and, out of sheer convenience, loosely define them for further simplification, knowing very well that in 10 years' time, our definition will likely need rigorous updating. This necessitates above all else the strict observation of the historical context, the material conditions of the era in question, when investigating a certain epoch. One must patiently consider the events that preceded and followed the given point in time, always seeking to understand the multidimensional causality of preceding, parallel, and following events.
If you found it hard to follow what he was trying to say and what his point is, don't worry, I had to go back a few times to check it myself. But let me explain these things very clearly for you instead of mystifying them with fancy words to make it seem like the things I am talking about make sense, like Odyssey does. So, first off, dialectical materialism. What is that exactly? I myself had an aneurysm trying to understand it at first, but the simplest way I could explain it is that it's a way of understanding how societies and ideas evolve over time. It combines 2 main ideas: materialism, focusing on the material conditions of life, like the economy, technology, and resources. It says that these material conditions shape society, culture, and human behavior. And then we have the dialectics. This is a method of understanding change through contradictions and their resolutions. It suggests that every situation contains contradictions, and their interaction leads to a new situation or synthesis. Alright, imagine you have 2 toy blocks. One block is red and the other block is blue. When you play with them, sometimes you want to stack them on top of each other, right? But what if these blocks don't just stay the same? What if they change and turn into different shapes when they interact with each other? Now, let's say the red block and the blue block start talking. The red block says, I think we should be a tall tower, and the blue block says, no, I think we should be a wide wall. They keep talking and changing each other's ideas until they find a way to be both a little tall and a little wide at the same time. And thus, this new situation, synthesis, is born. In simple terms, dialectical materialism says that societal changes happen because of conflicts between different material interests. And now we get to historical materialism. Both historical materialism and dialectical materialism start with the idea that material conditions are fundamental. Historical materialism specifically looks at how these conditions shape history. It basically just applies the concept of dialectical materialism to history. Historical materialism says that societal changes happen because of conflicts between different material interests, like the rich and the poor. These conflicts drive history forward as new solutions emerge from the struggles between opposing forces, meaning that the constant clash between the proletariat and the bourgeois creates a new synthesis, and that this, for example, explains how society evolved from feudalism to capitalism. It says that the economic structure of society, like how things are produced and who controls that production, shapes every other part of society, including politics, culture, and ideas. This means that according to historical materialism, conflicts in history have never been driven by petty things like religion, nationalism, glory, freedom, and so forth. It's all economic, and class struggle is what truly drives history forward. Putting aside the fact how laughably false historical materialism is, we also need to acknowledge how one-dimensional it is, the same exact thing Odyssey criticized the great man theory for. Tick History has an amazing video talking about dialectics, and he brilliantly explains how it functions as a cult. This topic definitely deserves more time to discuss, but alas, I cannot afford it right now, so make sure to check out Tick's video after this one. If you say that the only things driving history and conflicts forward are economic material conditions, then by definition, you are giving a one-dimensional presentation of history. Again, the same exact thing Odyssey is criticizing the great man theory for, because historical materialism is basically communists shoving one single concept and cause, which is class struggle, into history and making all of history revolve around that one concept and nothing else. History is often messy and complex. It doesn't fit easily into any one single abstract scheme. Economic and material conditions are definitely a factor, but they aren't the only ones. In my opinion, what truly moves history are disturbances in social forces, which can be brought by material conditions and technology, but also by new ideas, religions, knowledge, and so forth. When there is a shift in the balance of political forces, then the manner in which the country is constituted changes also. These great men are consequences of these disturbances in social forces. When you talk about how the Nazis got into power, there isn't one answer but multiple, like exploiting the political hardships of the Great Depression, clever political maneuvering, intimidation and violence, legislative manipulation, and so forth. It is almost never one cause, but several coinciding with each other. If Germany had never lost World War I, the Nazis would have never managed to take power, because by exploiting several factors that came as a consequence of the Treaty of Versailles, they managed to claw their way up and assume control. And Napoleon would have never managed to get his time to shine if the French Revolution ended in failure. So yeah, criticizing one theory of history for being simplistic and one-dimensional, while supporting another one that is also one-dimensional, really does not make sense in Balkan Odyssey's case. So in conclusion, in this video, Balkan Odyssey does a big strawman by saying that the academic field of history still adheres to the great man theory. He says how the mystification of one extreme, which is the great man, is bad and oversimplified, while on the other hand, mystifying the other extreme, which is the general intellect, where he also gives no nuance and complexity, and apparently this approach isn't oversimplifying history. And then he advocates for a Marxist one-dimensional analysis of historical progress while criticizing the other one for being one-dimensional as well. Yeah, I just can't go on anymore with this. This is exactly what happens when the ideology you believe in doesn't just tell you what the best way to run a society is, but also comes with its own way of interpreting the world around you and history. Because that automatically eliminates any chance of you being able to view things from a balanced and nuanced perspective. Your ideology automatically dictates to you how you should view these things. And because of that, communists unironically love making the "it's good when we do it" argument, like that time in the Italian parliament in the 1920s when Antonio Gramsci went up against Mussolini and said that fascist violence is bad, but proletarian violence is good because the communists are the ones who apparently represent the will of the majority of Italians. And we can very clearly see that in this video and every other one Balkan Odyssey makes. If he just stuck to the great man theory and argued that history is more complex and nuanced than that, then I would have 100% agreed with him. But it all started going downhill the moment he started shoving his Marxist worldview into the mix. Look, I don't have any problems with people analyzing something from an ideological perspective, but you don't need to shove your ideological bias into literally every topic imaginable. It's like they can only view things subjectively and never objectively, but since their ideology demands that of them, they have to give in. So yeah, I am done here for today. Remember kids, if you want to understand history in its fullest, there are many nuances and complexities for you to examine first. Very rarely is anything in history black and white. And for the love of God, do not start going down the dialectical materialist rabbit hole.